Hello, you're watching Headlines. I'm Anastasiya Lavrina. The ongoing conflict between Rwanda and the Democratic Republic of the Congo is intensifying, particularly in the eastern region. The M23 rebel group, allegedly supported by Rwanda, has made significant advances, causing widespread displacement and further complicating an already fragile situation. The conflict is also tied to the region's valuable mineral resources, which fund armed groups and contribute to the humanitarian crisis. As tensions rise, the international community is urging for a peaceful resolution to prevent broader regional instability. According to the United Nations, since January 26, nearly 3,000 people have been killed and 2,800 others injured in attacks by the M23 and their allies. Since the start of 2025, at least 237,000 people have been displaced by the conflict. What is the current situation on the ground? All the details in my program now. Joining me from London is Oluvale Ismail, Senior Lecturer, African Leadership Center, and Lidewide Bergmos, Associate Professor and Senior Researcher at the African Studies Student Center in Leiden, Netherlands. Dear experts, warm welcome to our program.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. So, Lidewide, let me start my first question with you. How would you describe the evolving dynamics in the conflict and what key developments are shaping the region today?
I think you started the introduction quite well by saying there, pointing to the recent escalation of the violence in Eastern Congo with the M23, so the M23 taking over Goma. M23 has been in the region and fighting this fight for a bit longer, taking over different parts of northern Kivu. To understand what's happening today, I think we have to look at this longer time frame, not only for when M23 started, but also look at the violence that has been taking place for the past 30 years in the region. But this recent escalation is quite puts the region, I would say, at the brink of escalating into a regional war. So,
Oluvale, the same question to you. What's your vision of the ongoing situation there? And one more question. M23 insists it's fighting for ethnic Tutsi rights, but its control over valuable resources like mines has raised suspicions about ulterior motives. Can you explain how these territorial gains align with the group's stated goals?
Yes, I think there are quite clear historical foundations to what is going on now. Back to the time of colonial rule by Belgium, even the creation of Hutu and Tutsi itself was a creation of Belgian colonial rule. And of course, since independence, there has always been a trade-off between stability in DRC and instability in neighboring countries. So it has always been rare to find DRC being stable at the same time with neighboring countries being stable. There has always been a trade-off. So when DRC is unstable, it means the neighboring countries are always going to be stable and vice versa. So we are seeing a repeat of this. Of course, the current escalation, you go back to the 1990s, the war that brought Kabila into power in DRC and the fallout that happened, the two Congolese wars of the 1990s. But the current escalation now, there are two distinct issues that underline, that underpin it. The first is the economic interest of neighboring countries in DRC. And we see Burundi is involved, Uganda is involved, of course, Rwanda is involved, but of course, you also have Tanzania and countries further away that have interest in Congolese mineral resources. So there are clear economic underlining causes or interest of neighboring countries. The second is the regional security complex. Rwanda claims it is trying to impose its own sphere of influence, a buffer zone, as a way of protecting itself from the armed Hutu militias who are still alleged to be roaming in the DRC on the one hand. So to protect itself from the Hutu militias being able to come into Rwanda on the one hand, but on the other hand, to protect the Hutu militias attacking Congolese Tutsi on the other hand. The same reason, Burundi is claiming that it has a security interest. So Uganda is also claiming that it's trying to protect itself from attacks by the ADF, the Islamic Jihad Salafia group operating across the border. So there are alleged security interests by the same set of regional actors who are involved in the crisis in DRC.
Indeed,
But of course, the final dimension is the internal dynamic of DRC itself, the relationship between Kinshasa and the neighboring countries, but also between Kinshasa and provinces, not South Kivu. You would know that the first crisis after independence was between Kinshasa and North Kivu over the alleged succession by Katanga. So there is a playback of what has been happening in the last 50, 60 years in DRC.
that's very interesting part about the global involvement. Lidovide, and alarming number of African armies already have troops deployed in the conflict zone, which has a long history of outside interference. What roles are Rwanda, Burundi, Uganda playing here?
I first have to apologize, but the sound is not good on this side, so I haven't been able to follow the conversation that Mr. Ismail has been pointing forward. So if I repeat things or say different things, then I apologize for not responding directly to the points that you have been making. Anastasia, if I understand you correctly, you're asking about the motives of Rwanda?
I mean, we have to understand the involvement of other countries in the region to the situation going around the DRC, Rwanda, and the rebels participating in all of these events which we observe from outside. Therefore, what roles are Rwanda, Burundi, Uganda, and other countries in the region can play and already play there?
I think so far the roles that the countries in the region have been playing have been one of escalating and supporting the violence rather than helping look for a peaceful solution. For instance, one of the reasons why we see escalation of the violence now, I think, is also because Rwanda has been seeing its situation threatened, increasingly threatened, both politically as well as economically in the eastern part of DR Congo. The presence of different countries in this region, or the stakes in this region of the different neighboring countries, is quite high in various ways. So Uganda has been invited a few years ago, have been invited to enter also the territory to fight one of the rebel groups that's also posing a threat to Uganda, for instance. There have also been other kind of projects that relate to infrastructure. There's the resources, the natural resources that are of prime interest also for neighboring countries and the global the global north, but also China and other countries increasingly that are producing electronics, for instance. So the interest of countries in the region has been quite high, and we see that also Burundi has been now fighting alongside the Congolese army. So they has been invited also to fight against the M23, also to the detriment of the relationship between Burundi and Rwanda, which was already not a positive relationship. So you see that these different countries are starting to be pitted increasingly against each other and fighting their fight as a form of a proxy war on the terrain, you could say, in eastern Congo. Motivations of Rwanda to be there is to, on the one hand, also protect its security concerns. It's where it at least gains also a lot of legitimacy from its own population and from people in the diaspora, where it says, well, there are different rebel movements who are in eastern Congo operating for a very long time. They increasingly pose a risk. The government of Tshisekedi is also now fighting, has now also created an alliance with a rebel movement, a rebel group that came from the FDLR, that came from the former genocidaires, so the people who fled as perpetrators of the genocide against the Tutsi in 1994. So they see that as an immediate threat to their own security. which gives them a certain kind of legitimacy to their, at least also their own population, to try and have influence on secure this region that is bordering their country. But there's also a motive of having and maintaining political influence in this region, and certainly also a more economic more economic stakes, where a lot of the revenue that the country, like the exports that Rwanda is building on, come directly from the Eastern Congo.
Indeed, that's a very important point. So, Olawale, I would like you also to comment on this part. How might the escalation of this conflict affect the international markets, and how this conflict impacts the interests of global powers?
Yes, I mean, everybody is talking about energy transition materials or minerals, critical, minerals that are key to energy transition. And DRC has some of the most proven and largest deposit of some of these critical energy transition materials. So the conflict there is definitely going to affect the supply of some of these energy transition minerals into the global market. I'm talking about lithium and cobalt and a few of these materials that are needed for global energy transition. So, of course, that would mean that the global debate and conversation policy agenda on climate change and energy transition, sustainability of the environment, and the transition from fossil fuel to renewables is going to be impacted directly or indirectly. The scale of the impact is going to be relative to whether the global demand for these minerals increases astronomically over the coming year or two. So it's definitely going to impact that. The other issue to also put on the table is that the conflict in DRC, I think after the conflict in Gaza that has defied all known and unknown ways of managing conflict, I think DRC comes second as the most troublesome, most complicated conflict in the world. That even though it's happening in Central Africa, in DRC, it does have global ramifications, however you want to look at it, whether in terms of humanitarian issues, whether in terms of global mineral supply chain, whether in terms of regional, stability, regional security complex in and around the DRC. So, because historically we've known that the crisis can get bigger over the coming 6 to 9 months, and it can draw in many more countries. It can trigger instability in neighboring countries, depending on how events in DRC pan out over the 12 to 18 months. So it's definitely going to affect the global energy transition, policy agenda for in terms of the supply of critical minerals.
Leader Leaders, the Democratic Republic of Congo has brought an unprecedented case against Rwanda over alleged human rights violations. How might the outcome of this legal case impact the ongoing conflict?
I think that's a good question. I think there are many processes happening at this moment, whereby the Congolese government is trying to influence also and mobilize international community, both in the region, in the African region, as well as more internationally and more globally, so to say, governments to act and install, for instance, sanctions against the government. Besides this case, the Rwandan government, besides this legal case, there's also protests being organized either by citizens or in other ways. There's political lobbying. The question is how the international community, the region, both in the region and beyond, are going to respond. It's been actually quite surprising to see in some ways that whereas in 2012, when Goma was taken over by the M23, there has been a fierce response by the international government communities, whereas at this moment, besides some condemnations and urges to find a diplomatic solution, there has actually not been a lot of response. And this is also worrying, seeing that this situation is escalating further.
Right. Oluwole, Lady Vito rightly pointed out that M23 also took Goma in 2012, leading to a major humanitarian catastrophe and allegations of war crimes. The international community reacted with cuts to Rwanda's foreign assistance and coordinated rebuke. Do you expect something similar to happen this time?
Even if it happens, how effective it's going to be, I don't know, because the world has changed. The global political dynamics landscape has changed. President Trump's much more transactional deal-making approach has thrown some of the global consensus and liberal internationalism, has thrown that under each cloud of doubt and the rest. But I think what is critical here is to understand that nations act based on interest. What is Rwanda's interest in the DRC? Yes, there are economic interest, and this has not started today. The economy of Rwanda has always been strongly linked to the economy of Eastern DRC. There are records even before colonialism, during colonialism, and since independence, up to date, that has reinforced there. So the economy of Goma and the whole of North Kivu is much more integrated with the economy of Rwanda than the economy of Kinshasa. You look at transport connections, communication systems, networks, the supply of food, the supply of medicines and everything. That has always been the case. So there are known economic interests. But more important is Rwanda's security interest in the DRC. How can this security interest be met, be taken care of? What will be needed to assure Rwanda's security interest? Because the genocide episode has changed Rwanda like it will change any country in the world. Meaning that you have to be proactive, you have to be front-footed in order to prevent a repeat of not just genocide, but also the destabilization of the regime in Kigali. So it is important that even when sanctions are imposed, when and if these known economic and more important security interests of Rwanda are not taken care of, sanctions can only go far, maybe over the short term. Countries find ways to adapt. You can look at, the Rwanda of 2012 is not the Rwanda of today. The global community that imposed the sanctions and cuts on Rwandan foreign aid and assistance, it's not the same global community now. The global community is much more fractured. Global consensus is very hard to reach. In the last 2 years, there have been UN panel of expert report that have provided very strong evidence that Rwanda is aiding M23. Of course, Rwanda denies this. But despite that report, what has the global community been able to do? Not much up to this moment. So I wouldn't place too much hope or emphasis on sanctions or even the global community having the consensus to act to impose sanctions on Rwanda. I think let's go back to real politics and not pretend that Rwanda does not have important interest and objective to be achieved in relation to Eastern DRC. The key issue should be how can this interest be met and be balanced in relation to the needs of the government in Kinshasa. Do the African Union deploy the African Standby Force in the border region between Rwanda and Eastern DRC, and also provide security guarantees in relation to the internal safety of Congolese Tutsis in the DRC? Can that be done? What is the prospect of achieving that? So rather than talk about sanctions, I think it's important to recognize that there are interests here. There are key national security challenges for Rwanda, of course, for DRC as well. How can these two interests be aligned? Is there a common ground for the security interest of Rwanda and the national security interest of DRC? And the same will apply to Burundi, because Burundi now is deployed in parts of South Kivu, because it's also fearing its own national security needs is at stake. Uganda is also there because of national security needs. So how can these security needs of neighboring countries that surround the DRC be balanced with the national security needs of DRC, the government of DRC itself? Don't forget, we are talking, DRC is a huge country. It's like 2/3 of Western Europe. It's like combining 7-8 countries in Europe together. So it's a huge country that we are talking about. It's a monster of a country in terms of size. So it's not like a small parcel of land. So these neighboring countries and the border regions are also vast territories, and sanctions cannot police those regions. Real politics, real national security, national interests are at stake here. And given the current climate of the world, with the war in Russia, Ukraine, the war in Gaza, some of the known consensus about even territoriality and territorial integrity of countries. Countries are willing to disrespect the territorial integrity of neighboring countries if their national security, if the safety of their citizens, if the safety of regimes are at stake. So that has been proven to be the case in the last decade. Thank you.
Thank you very much for such a broad and detailed answer indeed.
If I
and
can respond
yes, my last question to you. What's needed to secure a durable ceasefire? Do you agree?
Yeah, thank you for the question, because indeed I very much second what my colleague has just said, Mr. Ismail, because the sanctions in themselves, even sanctions and their effects have been changing, and we know quite a lot now about sanctions, and they very often have very negative impacts, particularly for the population. So in that sense, they are also not reaching their goal. There may be could be a symbolic way to sanction what is going on, but the actual economic sanctions, they would have detrimental repercussions primarily for the affected populations. So there's the point that my colleague is making about trying to find a way to get people on the table, particularly in the region, who have different security issues, who have different regime instability challenges, and who are trying to resolve these now on the ground in eastern DR Congo by taking different sides. I think the key point is to try and bring these actors together and find a solution whereby these different concerns that are in very many ways grounded, are taken into account and are finding a more structural solution.
Dear experts, thank you so much for joining our program today. It was indeed very interesting, detailed discussion of the situation around Democratic Republic of Congo and Rwanda. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Just to remind, today with us we had from London is Olawale Ismail, Senior Lecturer, African Leadership Center. And from Netherlands, we had Lidewide Bergmans, Associate Professor and Senior Researcher at the African Studies Center in Leiden, Netherlands. My name is Anastasiya Lavrina. Dear viewers, do stay with AnewZ and see you in the next edition.